Tom had never expected his routine as a janitor in the corporate building to lead to anything out of the ordinary. He had a job to do, a sick son to care for, and bills piling up. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. Every day, Tom walked through the same hallways, mopping the floors and cleaning up the messes that others left behind. It was lonely work, but he had grown used to it. That afternoon, Tom was on his usual rounds, pushing his cleaning cart down the long, quiet hallway. His thoughts were elsewhere, mainly on his son, Alex, who was at home with a fever. Tom had barely been able to get any rest the night before, and now he had to balance work with worry. It felt like everything was going wrong, but he couldn't afford to lose focus. As he passed by one of the meeting rooms, something unusual caught his eye. A figure standing by the window had him stopping in his tracks. She was tall, much taller than any human woman Tom had ever seen, and had skin that was a soft, almost luminous shade of blue. Her hair was silver, cascading down her back like threads of moonlight. She looked out of place in the otherwise ordinary office building. Her clothes were strange, not something a typical businesswoman would wear. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught Tom's attention. It was the sense of urgency radiating from her. Tom hesitated. He was used to seeing aliens come and go, as they had been living on Earth for years. But this woman, there was something about her that made him feel uneasy. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. She turned suddenly, catching him staring. Her eyes, a piercing shade of violet, locked onto his, and for a moment, Tom felt like she could see right through him. She took a few steps toward him, her movements graceful and precise. "Can I help you?" Tom asked, trying to sound professional despite the flutter of nervousness in his chest. The woman didn't answer right away. She glanced over her shoulder as if checking for something or someone, and then stepped closer to him. "Pretend you love me for 10 minutes?" she said, in a voice that was oddly calm, but filled with a sense of desperation. Her words were like a jolt to his system. Tom blinked in confusion. "What?" The woman seemed to understand his confusion and spoke again, her voice softer but still urgent. "I need you to pretend you love me just for 10 minutes. Can you do that?" Tom stood there for a moment, unsure whether he had heard her right. Was she joking? Or was this some sort of strange test? He glanced around the hallway. No one else seemed to be paying attention, but that didn't make the situation any less odd. He glanced back at her. She was serious, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Why?" he asked, trying to wrap his head around what she was asking him. "I'm in danger," she said, her voice shaking slightly now, the urgency growing. "My mission, it's at risk. If they know I'm alone, they'll come for me. They won't stop until I'm gone." Tom's heart began to race. He didn't know what to make of the situation. A mission? Danger? This wasn't the kind of thing he was used to dealing with, not as a janitor, not as a father. But the look in her eyes, the raw desperation, made him feel like he couldn't just walk away. He had to do something, before he could think it. "Through!" She took a small step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Just for 10 minutes, she repeated. "If you do this for me, I can make sure no one gets hurt. I just need to pretend, that's all. It's all I'm asking." Tom's mind raced. Was he really considering this? A part of him wanted to walk away, to just get back to his work, to go home and take care of his son. But another part of him felt something, a pull, like he had no choice but to act. There was something about her, something that made him feel like he could trust her, even though he had no reason to. He sighed. "Okay, 10 minutes. But what exactly do you want me to do?" She smiled faintly, a quick, almost relieved expression that softened her features. "Just act like you care. Like you're in love with me. Hold my hand, touch me. Look at me the way someone in love would. It's just for a short time, but it will make all the difference." Tom stared at her, his stomach tightening with unease. This was ridiculous. but something about the whole situation made him feel like it wasn't something he could ignore. He glanced at his watch. 10 minutes wasn't long. He could do this. He could pretend for 10 minutes. Without another word, he reached out and took her hand. The touch was unexpectedly warm, soft like she wasn't entirely alien, but human too. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face as though trying to gauge his sincerity. Her hand fit perfectly in his, and for the first time in a long while, Tom felt a strange sense of calm despite the situation. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise. You'll understand everything soon." Tom nodded, though his mind was still spinning. He didn't know what this woman was talking about, or why she needed him to pretend to love her. But there was no turning back now. He could only hope that the next 10 minutes wouldn't bring more trouble than he was already in. The brief touch of her hand lingered in Tom's mind as they walked toward the conference room. He couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake agreeing to this. What kind of person needed someone to pretend to love them, even for just 10 minutes? And why him? He was just a janitor, a guy who had no business getting involved in anything like this. But something in her eyes, the urgency, the fear, kept him from backing out. She wasn't asking for much, or so he thought. Just a simple act of pretending. As they neared the conference room, Tom could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The hallway felt quieter now, the air thick with the tension that seemed to cling to the alien woman. She led him through the wide double doors, which opened into a large modern room, the kind where deals were made and negotiations happened. But this wasn't a corporate deal, not even close. The room felt cold, clinical, and the sterile environment made Tom even more uncomfortable. They were met by a few other aliens, tall beings with different shades of skin, some with features Tom could barely comprehend. But what struck him most was the sense of power in the room. They weren't just diplomats or guests on Earth. They were important figures in whatever conflict was brewing, and now Tom was part of it. Zira, the alien woman, turned to face him. As they stepped inside, her expression still tense. She gave him a small nod, urging him to stay calm. The humans in the room glanced up as she walked in, their eyes immediately focusing on her. Tom felt a sudden wave of self-consciousness as, if all eyes were on him now, his palms started to sweat and he wiped them on his pants, trying to hide his nervousness. "We don't have much time," Zira said quietly, her voice almost a whisper, though the room was quiet enough that everyone could hear. "Just follow my lead. Pretend we're a couple, a human and an alien in love. That's all they need to see, for now." Tom didn't know if it was the pressure of the situation or the strange alien woman standing beside him, but he felt his heart race in his chest. Zira's violet eyes glanced at him for a brief moment before she gave him a reassuring smile. One that didn't quite reach her eyes. He nodded back, not entirely sure what he was supposed to do, but trusting her word. A figure at the far end of the room spoke then. It was an alien, with a long, almost serpentine body covered in iridescent scales. Its eyes were cold and calculating, and it had a voice that seemed to echo in Tom's chest. "We've been waiting for you, Zira," the alien said. Its tone wasn't friendly, more like a demand. Tom could see how the others in the room stiffened at the sound of its voice. Zira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for Tom's hand and held it, squeezing it gently. It was a small act, but it somehow felt significant, like a silent promise that they were in this together. Tom hesitated for a moment before he squeezed back. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew that the alien woman needed him, and that was enough for him to do whatever it took. "We're ready," Zira said, her voice more confident now as she stepped forward with Tom beside her. The room seemed to calm slightly as they approached the central table, where the discussions were about to begin. Tom's heart pounded as he sat down beside her. It felt like a game, but one with very high stakes. As the other aliens began speaking, Tom tried to focus on the conversation. He could make out bits and pieces, words like peace, negotiations, and alliance, but it didn't make sense to him. This wasn't his world. He was just a man trying to survive, not a part of any grand intergalactic diplomacy. Still, he sat there, pretending to be in love with Zira just like she had asked. The more he did it, the more it seemed real. Her presence, her grace, and the trust she had in him were all too palpable, and that's when it hit him. This wasn't just an act for Zira. It wasn't just for the alien factions in the room. It was for her, too. He could see it in the way she held herself, the way she spoke to the others. She wasn't just a diplomat trying to make peace. She was in danger, caught in the middle of a power struggle she didn't fully control. Her enemies were closing in, and she needed something, someone, to prove that she wasn't just a pawn in a game of politics. She needed to show strength, and if pretending to be in love with a human could do that, then that was the role Tom had to play. He glanced at Zira again, and this time, she didn't look at him with the same anxiousness. There was something different in her expression now, something like relief. The aliens in the room seemed to be watching them both, their eyes sharp and calculating, as though waiting for some kind of confirmation. Tom kept his focus on Zira, maintaining his hold on her hand. His mind raced, wondering what would happen next. But at that moment, he could feel a quiet connection growing between them. It was subtle, unspoken, but it was there. As Zira leaned in closer, Tom felt a surge of protectiveness. She wasn't just some alien diplomat to him anymore. She was a woman under pressure, a person who needed him, and in some strange way, he needed her too. But why? What was this pull between them? Before he could process his thoughts, the serpentine alien spoke again, this time louder, his voice sharp. "We've seen enough. You've done well, Zira. But there's more to this than what you've shown." The tension in the room seemed to grow thicker as the conversation shifted. The voices of the alien diplomats blended into an indistinguishable hum of negotiations, but Tom barely registered the words. His focus was on Zira, sitting next to him, still holding his hand with a gentle but firm grip. Her presence beside him felt like a quiet anchor, grounding him in the chaos around them. He couldn't help but notice the subtle tension in her posture, her shoulders slightly stiff, her eyes constantly scanning the room as though waiting for something. The other aliens, though seated around the large table, didn't seem to acknowledge Tom as anything more than a mere bystander. They were too busy with their own dealings, their conversations flowing in a strange language that Tom couldn't understand. But it wasn't the alien words that worried him. It was the way the room felt, like a pressure cooker simmering and ready to explode at any moment. Tom tried to keep his act together, to keep his face neutral. He wasn't an actor, and pretending to be in love with Zira was harder than he'd expected. The situation felt absurd. He was a janitor, a father just trying to make ends meet, and now he was sitting at the negotiating table with intergalactic diplomats, pretending to be something he wasn't. But as Zira's hand rested in his, the act began to feel less like a lie. There was something about the way her fingers curled around his, a kind of softness that made it impossible not to feel the connection, even if it was all a performance. A few minutes passed, and Tom found himself listening more intently to the conversation, despite not understanding the alien language. His mind tried to make sense of what was happening, but the more he focused, the more he realized he was out of his depth. This wasn't just some political drama. There were real stakes here, real lives at risk. Zira shifted slightly in her seat, turning her head toward him with a glance that seemed to hold both gratitude and a hint of something more. He returned the look, offering her a reassuring smile, though his stomach was tied in knots. He had no idea if they were convincing anyone. For all he knew, they could be failing miserably, and everything could come crashing down in an instant. But then, just as quickly as the pressure had built, it seemed to ease. The alien voices quieted, and the mood in the room shifted. It was like a silent signal had passed through the air, and now all eyes were on Zira and Tom. The moment felt electric, as if the weight of the galaxy was balancing on their shoulders, and everything was hanging by a fragile thread. Zira turned her body slightly towards Tom, and without a word, she leaned in closer. Tom's breath caught in his throat. She smelled faintly of something floral, almost like lavender. But it wasn't overpowering. Her presence was calming, and despite the absurdity of the situation, he couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth growing between them. She spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but it was filled with urgency. "Stay with me. Just for a few more minutes. Don't break the act." Tom nodded, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what would happen if he didn't. He had no idea what the next few minutes would hold. But he understood that this small act, this simple gesture of pretending to love her, was more important than he could ever have imagined. The meeting continued, but it felt different now. Every word spoken by the alien leaders seemed to carry more weight, and Tom found himself more invested than ever in the outcome. He couldn't help but wonder what Zira's real mission was. Why was she in such danger? And why did it have to involve him? But for now, all he could do was play along. He kept his focus on her, offering her a reassuring smile when she glanced at him. It wasn't hard to keep the act up now. Something in her gaze told him that this was more than just a performance for her. This was real, even if it was temporary, as the minutes ticked by. The other aliens seemed to grow more relaxed, less suspicious. The intensity in the room started to dissipate, and Tom realized that the act was working. Zira was right. They needed to present a united front, and as long as they played their parts, they could defuse whatever tension had been building. Tom felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was short-lived. As the discussions continued, his mind kept racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. He was just a janitor, a single dad with no special skills, yet here he was, playing a pivotal role in something that could change the course of history, or at least the balance of power between species. As the final minutes of the meeting approached, Zira's grip on his hand tightened slightly. It was subtle, but Tom noticed it. The act was almost over. Would it be enough? Would they leave the room safe, or would the delicate peace they had worked for shatter into chaos? The thought was overwhelming, and Tom pushed it aside. For now, he had to stay in character, to be the man Zira needed him to be. His thoughts turned to his son, Alex, back home, sick and alone. Tom had to believe that this would end well, that everything he was doing now would somehow make a difference. Because if it didn't, he wasn't sure what he would have left. As the conversation in the room carried on, Tom began to notice something he hadn't expected. The act, the pretend love, was starting to feel real. The more he sat next to Zira, the more he found himself drawn to her, not just as a mysterious alien diplomat, but as a person, someone who was fighting to survive just like him. There was a depth to her that he hadn't seen before, a vulnerability hidden beneath her composed exterior. It wasn't that he wanted to fall in love with her. He wasn't sure what love even meant in this strange situation. But there was something undeniable between them now. When their hands touched, there was an unspoken understanding that they were in this together. They were both playing roles, but they were also navigating something that neither of them fully understood. Maybe it wasn't love in the traditional sense, but there was a bond, a connection that had formed in the chaos. Zira, too, seemed to be growing more at ease. Her earlier tension had softened, and though she still appeared focused on the alien, leaders around the table, there was a calmness to her that Tom had started to admire. It wasn't just her beauty or the way she held herself with such grace. It was the strength that radiated from her, despite the clear danger she was in. Tom had thought he was just helping her out of a tight spot, but now he realized that she was helping him too. Tom wasn't used to feeling important. His life had always been about getting by, taking care of his son, and doing whatever was necessary to survive. But here, in this room full of alien diplomats, he felt something different. Like he mattered. He didn't know if it was because of the role he was playing in Zira's mission, or if it was the simple act of being needed. But whatever it was, it made him feel like he had a purpose, something greater than cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. Zira's hand remained in his, and every so often she would glance at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, as though she were silently thanking him for his support. Tom didn't know what she had expected when she first asked him for help, but now he was starting to think that, in some way, this was as much for her as it was for him. This wasn't just about playing a role, it was about two beings from entirely different worlds coming together to protect something bigger than themselves. The aliens around the table spoke in their language, but Tom's focus was no longer on their words. His attention was on Zira, watching her as she communicated with them. She had become more than just an alien diplomat to him. She was a person in need, and he was standing by her side. There was something beautiful in that, something real. It wasn't just about pretending anymore. It was about standing together in the face of something neither of them could control. As the discussions continued, Zira leaned slightly closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Thank you for staying with me. I know this isn't easy, but you're doing more than just helping me play a part. You're giving me something I didn't think I would have, hope." Tom didn't know what to say to that. His throat tightened, and for a moment, he won. Dared if she could feel the same kind of connection he was starting to feel. He had been so focused on just getting through the act, on keeping everything together, that he hadn't stopped to think about the emotional weight of it all. Zira wasn't just playing a role either. She was living through something much bigger than either of them could understand, and in this moment she had trusted him enough to ask for help in a way that wasn't easy for her. His thoughts were interrupted when the serpentine alien at the far end of the table spoke again, its voice low and commanding. "Your actions, Zira, are being watched. Your decision to bring a human into this negotiation is a gamble, but we will see if your gambit pays off." The weight of the alien's words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Tom could feel the pressure building again. He glanced at Zira, noticing the brief flicker of worry in her eyes before she masked it with a calm, composed expression. She had been calm throughout this entire ordeal, but in that moment, Tom saw the fear beneath it. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, not knowing what would happen next, but knowing he couldn't turn back. He wasn't sure how long he could keep up the act, or how long he could continue pretending that everything was okay. But one thing was clear. Zira needed him, and maybe, just maybe, he needed her too. "I won't let them hurt you," Tom said softly, the words coming out before he even had time to think about them. He wasn't sure where the promise had come from, but it felt real. Zira's eyes met his, her expression softening. She didn't say anything at first, but there was a subtle change in the way she held herself. It was as if the weight of her own fears had lessened just a little, knowing that she wasn't facing them alone. The meeting room was heavy with tension, the air thick with unspoken words and calculations. The alien diplomats around the table continued their conversations, their voices low and measured, but Tom found it harder and harder to focus on them. His mind kept drifting back to Zira, the way her hand felt in his, the way her eyes occasionally met his with gratitude, and the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. It wasn't just about playing a role anymore. There was something deeper now, something real. Tom couldn't deny it. He was in this, truly in this. And it wasn't just because of the promise he had made to help her for a few minutes. He was connected to her, and somehow that made him feel like he mattered in a way he never had before. As the conversation around them continued, Zira shifted slightly in her seat. She glanced at him, her eyes softening, and for a moment she didn't seem like an alien diplomat, but like someone who had been through too much and was finally finding a sense of comfort. In the most unlikely of places, Tom's chest tightened as he realized how much she was depending on him. Without breaking eye contact, Zira leaned in closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for staying with me," she said, her words simple but heavy with meaning. "I know this isn't easy for you. I can see it in your eyes, but you're doing more than you know. You've given me something I didn't think I would have here, something I thought I had lost." Tom didn't know how to respond at first. He wasn't sure what she meant by that. What had she lost? Her confidence? Her trust in others? Or was it something deeper? He didn't have the answers, but for the first time since he'd met her, he realized that Zira wasn't just playing a role either. She wasn't just asking him to pretend. She was asking for something more. "Zira," Tom started, his voice soft and uncertain. He didn't want to say the wrong thing, but the words felt natural, like they needed to be spoken. "What's really going on here? Why is this so important? Why do they need to believe we're—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "In love?" Zira's eyes flickered briefly, a flash of something, fear, or maybe something deeper, before she regained her composure. She took a deep breath, as if weighing whether or not she could trust him with the truth. Tom could see that she was struggling with it. She had her guard up, as she had from the very beginning, but now, in the midst of all this, it seemed like the right moment to let him in. "They need to believe we are united," she said, her voice steady but with a trace of vulnerability. "They need to see that humans and my people can come together, that we are willing to trust each other. If they think I'm isolated or weak, they'll take advantage of it. If they think I can't count on anyone at all, then they will strike." Tom felt a chill run down his spine as her words sank in. He had thought it was just about appearances, about keeping up the pretense of a relationship for a few minutes. But now he understood that it was far more than that. It wasn't just a political maneuver. Zira's life, maybe the fate of an entire people, was riding on this. "And you?" Tom asked, his voice quieter now, almost afraid of the answer. "Do you trust me?" For a moment, Zira didn't respond. She simply stared at him, her eyes searching his face. Her grip on his hand tightened, and Tom could feel her warmth seeping into him, like she was grounding herself with him in this moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but filled with an intensity he hadn't expected. "I do," she said, her words firm. "I didn't think I could trust anyone, especially not a human. But you've done more than just pretend for me. You've given me something I thought I had lost. Hope. You didn't have to help me. You didn't owe me anything. But you stayed. And now, I'm not alone anymore." Tom's heart thudded in his chest. There was so much raw emotion in her words, so much vulnerability that it made his chest tighten. He wasn't used to hearing people open up like this, especially not in such a high-stakes situation. But Zira had done it. She had trusted him with a piece of herself that she hadn't shown to anyone else. "I don't know what's going to happen next," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "But I do know that you've helped me, more than you realize. And for that, I'm grateful. I just need you to keep holding on for a little longer. Just a little longer." Tom felt a wave of determination rise within him. He had no idea what was at stake, what kind of dangerous game he was playing. But Zira needed him. She trusted him. And for the first time in a long while, Tom felt like he had a purpose, something bigger than just surviving from day to day. He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady. "I won't let you down." Zira's eyes softened, and for the first time, a true smile, one that reached her eyes, appeared on her face. It was a small thing, but to Tom, it felt like a victory. In that moment, they weren't just playing a role. They weren't just pretending. They were two people, from different worlds, standing together in the face of something much bigger than themselves. The meeting was still far from over, but Tom no longer felt like an outsider. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He wasn't just some human caught in the middle of alien politics. He was a part of something real, something that mattered. And as he looked at Zira, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The quiet hum of conversation around the table had grown louder, more intense. The alien leaders were engaged in their discussions, their voices rising and falling like a rhythmic chant, though Tom couldn't follow the words. His attention was fixed on Zira, whose expression had shifted from a calm composure to something more guarded. It was subtle, but Tom could see the change. Her hand, which had once rested gently in his, was now tense, her grip tightening with each passing moment. For a moment, everything felt like it was standing still. Tom could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, his pulse quickening. He had thought the worst of the tension was over, that they had made their mark, but now something in the air had shifted again. Zira, who had been so steady, was on edge, and that made Tom uneasy. He glanced around the room, trying to read the faces of the other alien diplomats. Some were leaning in closer to each other, whispering in hushed tones, while others were watching Zira and him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Something wasn't right. As the minutes stretched on, Zira's eyes darted to the far corner of the room. Her gaze lingered there for a moment, and Tom could see the subtle tension in her body. She was trying to hide it, but it was clear. Something was about to happen. Without warning, the serpentine alien who had been observing them leaned forward, its voice breaking through the murmur of conversation. "We've seen enough," it said, its words cutting through the room like a blade. "Zira, you're human. He's more involved in this than you've let on." Tom's stomach dropped. The air felt colder, as if the walls of the room were closing in around them. Zira's grip on his hand tightened, her knuckles white. She didn't look at him, but he could feel the shift in her energy. She was bracing for something, and he had no idea what. "You've played your part well," the serpentine alien continued, its eyes flicking to Tom and back to Zira. "But we know what's really going on. The alliance is not just about peace, it's about control. And if we can't trust you, Zira, then we cannot trust anyone." Tom's mind was racing. He had no idea what the alien meant, but the tone in its voice was unmistakable. This was no longer about simple diplomacy. Something had shifted, and they were in deeper than either of them could have anticipated. Zira's face remained stoic, but Tom could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. She had been prepared for a lot, but this wasn't what she had expected. The game had changed, and she hadn't seen it coming. Zira began, but she was interrupted by the booming voice of another alien, one that had remained silent up until now. "Enough!" it said sharply. "We know what you're hiding. The human is more than just an accomplice. He's part of the plan." Tom's breath caught in his throat. His heart was pounding in his chest as he realized that whatever they had been doing, the pretending, the act, the connection, wasn't just a simple political strategy anymore. Somehow, Tom had been pulled into something much bigger. And now, the truth was beginning to unravel in a way that neither he nor Zira could control. He felt the weight of the room on his shoulders, the eyes of the alien diplomats fixed on him, as though they could see into his very soul. Zira's hand was still clenched around his, but it felt different now. There was no longer any comfort in her touch, only the cold, hard reality of what they had gotten themselves into. "You don't Understand? Zira said, her voice steady, though Tom could hear the underlying strain. I never meant for this to happen. He's not involved in anything, he's just helping me. The alien who had first spoken, the serpentine one, smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made Tom's skin crawl. Helping you? Or is he part of the plan? You've kept him close, Zira. Far too close. Perhaps he's the one you trust the most, because he's the one who can keep your secrets safe. Tom swallowed hard, the room spinning around him. He had no idea what they were talking about. He had been dragged into something that was beyond his understanding, and now it was all coming to a head. Zira stood up abruptly, pulling her hand away from his. No, she said, her voice firm, but her eyes were filled with a fear that sent a chill down Tom's spine. You don't know what you're talking about. This is bigger than you think. The tension in the room was palpable. Tom felt like he was suffocating under the weight of their scrutiny. He didn't know what was happening, but he could see the look of desperation in Zira's eyes, and he knew that whatever this was, it wasn't just a political game. It was a fight for survival. As Zira stepped back, one of the other aliens, a tall figure with shimmering gold skin, stood up, its voice booming. You've made your choice, Zira, and so has your human friend. The time for pretending is over. Tom's mind raced. The truth was starting to settle in, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. He wasn't just a bystander in this. He was part of something that was spiraling out of control, and Zira's life was in danger because of it. He had to make a choice, stand by her or walk away. But something in Zira's eyes told him that walking away wasn't an option. This wasn't just about the politics of peace anymore. It was about survival. And Tom wasn't sure if he was ready for what was about to happen next, but he knew that he wasn't going to leave her side. The room was silent. Every eye was on Zira and Tom, the weight of their words hanging in the air like an invisible force. The alien diplomats around the table had ceased their conversations, and now all attention was focused on the two of them. The tension was so thick that Tom could almost feel it pressing down on his shoulders. The stakes had never felt higher. Zira stood tall, her posture firm, but with a hint of weariness in her eyes. Tom knew she was just as exhausted as he felt, but there was something else in her, something unyielding, something fierce. She wasn't going to let this be the end. He could see that now, despite everything. I told you, Zira said, her voice calm but laced with determination. I never wanted any of this. I didn't want to involve him, but I didn't have a choice. This is the only way. Tom watched her closely, his heart beating a little faster as he stood by her side. He didn't fully understand everything that had been going on, but he understood this. Zira needed him, and he wasn't about to back down. Not now. The serpentine alien, still seated at the far end of the table, narrowed its eyes at Zira. You've made a dangerous choice, Zira. Involving a human in this matter was never part of the plan. You have no idea the risks you've taken. Zira's eyes flickered toward Tom before she spoke again, her voice steady. I don't care about the risks anymore. I care about doing what's right. The tension in the room seemed to shift. It was no longer just about politics or power. Zira's words had cut through the noise, reaching everyone present. Even the other aliens, once so confident in their control over the situation, now seemed uncertain. They weren't used to hearing such defiance from her. Tom glanced around the room, his stomach still tight with nerves. But something had changed. The fear that had gripped him earlier was fading, replaced by a sense of clarity. He had been thrust into this situation by chance, but he wasn't going to let it control him. He was in this, for better or worse, and he wasn't going to let Zira face whatever came next alone. Zira turned to him then, her gaze meeting his, and for the first time since they'd started this journey, there was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile, and it was enough to fill Tom with a strange sense of peace. "I need you to trust me," she whispered, her words just for him. "We're not out of danger yet, but I can fix this. I can make sure we walk out of here alive." Tom didn't hesitate. He nodded, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. "I trust you." The alien diplomats seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the next move. Zira stood motionless, her eyes scanning the room, calculating her next steps. Tom could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him, but he also felt a sense of pride. He had made a choice, and now he was committed to it. He would stand by her no matter what. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The room was locked in a tense silence, the kind of quiet that happens just before a storm. Then the tall alien with golden skin, who had been watching them with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, finally spoke. "Enough," the alien said, its voice deep and commanding. "We will not threaten Zira any longer. Her loyalty to her cause and to her human ally has been proven." Zira's shoulders seemed to relax, just a fraction, but she remained poised. Tom couldn't help but notice how she carried herself, like she had been through so much already, but still stood firm in the face of everything. He admired her more than he had words for. "What happens now?" Tom asked, his voice louder than he'd expected. The golden alien's gaze shifted to him. "Now, we will form the alliance you so desperately wanted," it said slowly, its eyes narrowing slightly. "But know this, there is no turning back now. Your involvement with Zira has ensured that. You are part of this. Whether you understand it or not." Tom met the alien's gaze without flinching. He didn't fully understand everything that had just transpired, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. He had already made his choice. Zira turned toward him again, and this time there was a glimmer of something else in her eyes, something softer, more human. She stepped closer to him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she leaned in and placed a brief, gentle kiss on his cheek. It was quick, but the gesture carried more weight than any words could. "Thank you," she whispered. Tom blinked, stunned by the sudden intimacy of the moment. But as she pulled back, he saw the gratitude in her eyes, the real, raw emotion that had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of diplomacy and duty. The room was still, the air was heavy, but there was a sense of finality now. It was done. The alliance was formed. Zira had won her place, and Tom, against all odds, had become a part of something greater than he had ever imagined. "Let's go," Zira said, her voice steady again, but with a hint of relief. She turned, heading toward the exit, and Tom followed close behind. The alien diplomats didn't stop them. They simply watched as Zira and Tom left the room, no longer the desperate strangers they had once been, but something more. A team. A partnership that had been forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. As they stepped out of the meeting room and into the hallway, Tom took a deep breath, the weight of everything still pressing on him. But now it felt lighter. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He wasn't just a single dad trying to get by. He was part of something much bigger, a piece of a story that had only just begun.